welcome at the Hague Center for Strategic Studies. Excellencies, generals, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, welcome here at our facilities. What a crowd and what a nice lineup. Today is remarkable for HCSS. We never had such a highly esteemed lineup with ministers of the 3 Baltic states and of the Netherlands. Mr. Ruben Brekelmans will enter shortly. He still had a meeting. We were informed about that, so he will enter a little bit later. And first of all, let me thank you for being here, but also thank you to the Baltic state embassies for making this possible. So we'd like to have a little applause for that one as well. My name is Michel Rademaker. I'm the Deputy Director of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies and one of the co-founders of our institute. And I'm really looking forward to this day. We live at this time in a gray zone, as we call it often, with Russia as an aggressor on the doorstep of our NATO territories, close to the Baltics. And we know that Putin doesn't hold back. So today's topic of the Baltic Defence Line is more than timely. For almost 75 years, NATO has been our most important pillar for European security by providing a strong link between Europe and North America in the political and defense spheres. Since its conception, NATO, strictly a defensive alliance, has undergone a number of important changes and transformations in its strategies and military postures. In response to the resurgent Russian threat to Euro-Atlantic security, NATO has taken a strategic approach to reinforcing its deterrence and defense, especially on the eastern flank. In turn, the Baltic states have dramatically increased their defense spending to about 3% and taken unprecedented steps to strengthen their territorial defense, including by developing complex fortifications or border facilities, also known as the Baltic Defence Line. This reinforced defense also complements NATO's forward defense strategy in Europe. The upcoming NATO summit in The Hague presents an excellent opportunity to agree on a number of critical issues, especially on NATO's long-term strategic approach towards Russia, as well as on the strengthening of the deterrence and defense of the alliance. Therefore, it is of utmost importance to consider these steps that have to be taken by the alliance in order to strengthen its forward defense and how to progress more quickly in order to enhance border security and defense architectures of NATO's eastern flank. The role of the EU is also very important as it is a common NATO and EU border, and EU may play a big role with its strong focus on investments in this field. Today is also the start of various HCSS pre-events leading up to the NATO summit in The Hague. HCSS will be organizing some 8 events, some of them sponsored by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Defence, and some are sponsored by others, like today. To name a few, we will organize events on deterrence, on sustainment, on future fuels and storage, on cyber, on resilience, on seabed security, and on missions and operations, as well as on climate and security. So quite a lot. As you have noticed already, I said that Mr. Brekelmans is missing, but he will be here and joining us in a couple of minutes. It's a busy day today and it's crowded, so please put out your cell phones if not already. Today's it's more or less a custom for everybody to do it. We have to keep time a bit because of the crowds and we start moving around. That always takes time, so please take care of your clock. If you have any questions, please ask our staff. You already met a couple of them, so don't hesitate on that one. But I would suggest that we start with the symposium. And let me then introduce to you Dr. Tim Swijs. He is our Director of Research, and he will have a keynote to set the scene for this event. Without further ado, Tim, I think the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Thank you. And thank you, Michel. Can you hear me in the back? Excellent. I see people nodding. Welcome to a very special and important event for us. On the defense of NATO's eastern flank, and specifically focusing on the Baltic Defence Line. And of course, a very special welcome, a warm welcome to our distinguished ministers from the Baltic states, Mr. Hanno Pevkur, the Estonian Minister of Defence, Mr. Dovilė Šakalienė, the Lithuanian Minister of Defence, and Mr. Andris Sprūds, the Latvian Minister of Defence. And Mr. Ruben Brekelmans, the Dutch Minister of Defence, will be joining us very shortly. So we gather here today as the war in Ukraine has been raging for 35 months now. It's only 1,400 kilometers that way. And the war in Ukraine, of course, marks the return of large-scale conventional war to the European continent. It's a war that many of us in security communities in Western Europe specifically, and we'll talk about that today, previously thought to be impossible. Let's face it, sustained conventional wars, people thought that belonged, if not to the 19th, then at least to the 20th century. And here we are today. And so this is leading to a fundamental societal rethink. It's just not only a political rethink, it's a societal rethink of how we should prepare for war. And it also leading to the rediscovery of some of the fundamental characteristics of war. So the war in Ukraine has punctured portrayals of future war as being only hybrid or gray zone or liminal. But also it has punctured images of future war being precise and accurate and swift. The war is not clean and swift. No, it's a war of attrition, with large armies stretched out over hundreds and hundreds of miles of battlefront. It requires societal mobilization. It requires the replenishment of military stockpiles. It requires the military-industrial weight of many non-belligerents as well, alongside large-scale international financial assistance. So we live in a day and age in which alliances return to the fore. And so over the past 3 years, Europeans have engaged in a significant amount of soul-searching. That process is, of course, still ongoing, but it is already translating into real reversals in the ways in which Europeans prepare for war. A Zeitenwende has taken place, yes, but that Zeitenwende is not only limited to Germany alone. There is a belated recognition, especially on this side of Europe, that Russia is a revanchist, and revisionist power. And our allies closer to Russia, and specifically our friends from the Baltic states that are present here today, were of course less naive about the threat posed by Russia. It's now widely recognized that allies need to step up their effort. By now, 23 of the 32 allies have met that 2% target. And now that target is again going, that 2% target, and now that target has been set, well, if not at 5 by the incoming president of the US, NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte put it at 3.7, I believe. My own country, the Netherlands, tripled its defense spending over the past 10 years. And Estonia and Latvia spend well above 3%, and Lithuania is also above that number. Europe is rebuilding its defense industries, which is allowed to dilapidate, let's be frank. But also the European Commission is stepping up its role in this sphere, appointing a new Commissioner for Defense and Space, Mr. Andris Sprūds. But above all, and that is of course a theme of today, NATO as a political and military alliance is once again the cornerstone of defense and security efforts. Even more so in the period of out-of-area operations, it's the focal point of efforts to bolster the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. Now, a key priority, of course, for the alliance, for all the alliance members, is how to deter Russia from further territorial expansion. Defending and protecting every inch of territory, protecting our societies, both against Russia's conventional and nuclear capabilities. But as has become increasingly clear over the past, not just years, but also months, weeks, and days, there is also an increasingly aggressive grey zone campaign, which is really at the threshold of starting to constitute a conventional threat as well. Attacks on vital infrastructure in the Baltic Seas, attacks on factories, and now I read it, I think 2 days ago in the New York Times, the discovery of a plot to blow up packages in airplanes. I mean, these two really fundamentally are constituting a clear and present danger. Now, in this context, there's one other challenge, and I think we're going to also address what's, it's not an elephant in this room, I mean, it's out there, challenge transatlantic unity, right? With the incoming US president being known for its proclivity to strike deals with authoritarian leaders, but also with a clear transactional view on international relations and also on intra-alliance dynamics. So in this context, the defense of the Eastern Front is of the utmost importance. In turn, and Michel alluded to this, the Baltic states have taken unprecedented steps to strengthen their territorial defense, including through the development of fortifications. It's a process that stretches out over time, but it's known as the Baltic Defence Line, and it clearly marks the return of what I would portray as a deterrence by denial posture, complemented, of course, with the deterrence by punishment posture of the alliance. So, in the run-up to the upcoming NATO summit in The Hague, we have the chance to discuss NATO's defense of the Eastern Front, but more broadly, NATO's long-term approach towards Russia, with 4 eminencies present here today. We will hear the views from the ministers on policies that the alliance will need to implement in order to strengthen forward defense, but also in order how we can bolster and strengthen border security in the broader defense architecture on NATO's eastern flank. With that, the battle rhythm is as follows. The Dutch Minister of Defence, Ruben Brekelmans, will kick off with a keynote of about 15 minutes. We will then invite all the 4 ministers to join us on stage. And I will invite the Minister of Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania to share some opening remarks to set the stage. And we will then proceed with a panel discussion with the ministers. With that, at HCSS, we seek to actively promote and facilitate the exchange of ideas to inform public policy and political discourses. So I'll moderate the panel, but after some time, as is the usance here, I will open up the discussion to the floor. I will ask you to stand up, quickly introduce yourself, and ask a brief question rather than treating us on a lengthy expose. I think that will be appreciated by the ministers, by myself, and also by your other audience members. With that, Michel, would you like to introduce the minister?
Yeah, thank you so much, Tim, for the introduction of today's event. And as you've already seen, welcome Minister Brekelmans for joining us in this really highly esteemed line of all those ministers. I would like to give you the floor first to do a keynote, and I think you're already prepared, so without further ado, I would suggest that you take the floor. Thanks. And give it a warm applause, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear Hanno, dear Andris, dear Dovilė, it's very good to see you again. And I fondly remember the warm welcome I received when I visited Estonia just before Christmas and Lithuania last September. So it's an honor to be able to return the favor today, already this morning at the ministry, but also here at this very important think tank, and welcome you all here in The Hague. And let me also thank our highly respected Knowledge Institute, HCSS, for organizing this important event. This is a valuable opportunity to hear firsthand from our Baltic friends and to discuss what is needed to stand shoulder to shoulder with you, and of course also with our friends in Ukraine. Allow me to make a few remarks to set the scene for today's panel discussion. Unfortunately, we see that the Russian threat is only growing. As a result, for our collective security, the eastern flank is NATO's main area of concern. And it's very simple. Your borders, the borders of the Baltic states, are our borders. Your security is our security. And your concerns are our concerns. That's why we as the Netherlands are also so active in the Baltic region. From a Dutch perspective, the numbers speak for itself. Hundreds of Dutch army personnel have taken part in NATO's battle group in Lithuania over the last couple of years. 4 Dutch F-35s are currently patrolling the Baltic skies. 2 Dutch Navy vessels currently serve as the flagships of their respective NATO fleets. both fleets will show their presence in the Baltic Sea. And recently we had important exercises with our Patriot systems in Lithuania, which also contribute to our collective deterrence. And together with our Baltic partners, we are heavily investing in the rapid procurement of ammunition, the development and production of battle drones, and the strengthening of IT systems. Of course, we do this to strengthen our own defense and deterrence, but also to speed up our collective support to Ukraine. And recently, I was also happy to announce that so far we contributed almost 6 billion in military support to Ukraine. And that's not what we pledged, but that's what we have realized so far. And we are working very hard to further speeden up not only the pledges we made to Ukraine, but also the delivery of our support to Ukraine. Unfortunately, we need to look further than Ukraine and only what's happening at NATO's eastern flank. Because Russia is moving its hybrid operations also here to the Netherlands. And that's why we came to the conclusion that we are currently not formally at war, but we are not at peace either. We are living in a gray zone. We have recently seen cyber attacks on Dutch hospitals, ports and universities. Critical infrastructure in our own territorial waters is subject to espionage and sabotage. It's also telling that, for example, the oil tanker seized by Finland had earlier acted suspiciously when close to the Dutch coast. And we are seeing continuing covert operations intended to influence public opinion all over Europe in order to destabilize our democracies. Sometimes visible, sometimes more invisible, but it all has proven to be quite an effective weapon that Russia is using against us. In the meantime, Russia is rapidly accelerating its defense production. They will only increase production even more in the upcoming years. Right now, NATO's defense forces are strong enough to deter Russia and other adversaries. But if Russia keeps outproducing us, this balance can shift over the next couple of years. And we have estimated that Russia can shift its troops and assets from Ukraine to other parts of our NATO borders in slightly less than a year. And if we cannot match this with the same speed and with the same capacities, we can find ourselves in a very vulnerable situation in the short term. We need to prevent this so-called window of vulnerability from happening. And that's why we need to act now. In 2025, we can anticipate a number of significant changes. President-elect Trump will come into office, and we know and we have seen that he has his own particular views. We need to rapidly engage with the new US administration to discuss NATO commitments and to discuss Russia's real ambitions and real aggression. Right now, Russia believes it has the upper hand in Ukraine and that it will win, as long as it can outlast our collective resolve. And we cannot allow that. A Ukrainian loss will have far-reaching consequences for our freedom and our security, our standing in the world and our normative power. Because if Russia succeeds, it will only provoke more aggression. So in order to deter Putin, we must have the necessary combat power, political commitment, and ability to execute long-term military operations. And this means at least two things. First, we need to continue to support Ukraine as much as we can. If any negotiations are initiated in 2025, we want Ukraine to conduct these talks from the strongest position possible. And second, we must be fully prepared for what Russia might do next. Because if the situation in Ukraine changes, for example, a ceasefire or something like a peace deal, Russia's aggression will certainly not be over. Hanno, when I visited Estonia in December, you pointed out exactly where Putin might move his troops if he had them available. We have already updated our maps, is what you told me. Those maps now indicate the possibility of tens of thousands of Russian soldiers being stationed just across the borders of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. This means that we must do more to bolster our collective deterrence and collective defense. We must continue to strengthen our own armed forces. And we must continue to increase the readiness and resilience of our societies. All of this to ensure first that Russia thinks twice before provoking or even seeking a military confrontation with NATO. And second, that Russia would lose such a confrontation if it were to indeed attack a NATO country. So we need to step up. We need to do this individually, we need to do this as NATO allies, and we need to do this as EU member states. As nations, we need to quickly increase the resilience of our societies. And in this regard, Estonians, Latvians, and Lithuanians are truly leading the way. 3 years after the start of Russia's large-scale aggression, and 10 years after Russia's first attack on Ukraine, we still have a lot to learn from your risk awareness and your preparedness. Especially now, as also in the Netherlands, we are speeding up our efforts to make sure the whole of Dutch society is both aware and prepared. Within NATO, our #1 priority is to ramp up our defense production, as NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte also reiterated last month. And I'm sure that this year's very important NATO summit in The Hague will further accelerate this process. The summit will be a crucial discussion on the state of our alliance. And along with the NATO summit, we will be hosting the NATO Industry Forum, which is intended to facilitate strategic partnerships between industry and government. Because our defense industries need to deliver more and need to deliver faster. These intentions to ramp up our industrial production also put the European Union in an important position. I'm sure we all agree that European countries need to improve their ability to safeguard the security of our own continent within the NATO framework. So we are eagerly looking forward to both the European Commission's white paper on defense and the European Commission's preparedness strategy. Both will help Europe to deploy its full economic arsenal and its societal arsenal to boost our collective readiness. Our message here is simple. If we want to fully support Ukraine, strengthen our own armed forces, and deter our adversaries in the long term, Europe needs to step up too. This is the moment to speed up our defense industry, even if it requires us jumping over our own national shadows. In the very short term, we also need to develop a stronger answer to Russia's hybrid activities, particularly sabotage of our critical infrastructure in the Baltic Sea, but also in the North Sea. It's very simple. A hybrid car, in the end, is a car. The same is true with hybrid warfare. In the end, it's a form of warfare. So we need to further invest and develop our maritime capacity to detect Russian acts of sabotage. We also need to make sure that we have the right legal frameworks in order to be able to respond to it. And we need to cooperate closely, coordinate our actions, and exchange ideas and practices, so that each of us does not need to invent the wheel individually. It's better to use our collective strength, our collective ideas, and our collective capacities. And in addition, as I just mentioned, apart from what we are doing as individual countries together, the European Commission's white paper on defense is going to be a very important instrument and document to step up our collective efforts. I think this white paper should focus on 3 topics. First, as I said, speeding up and scaling up the capacity of the European defense industry. Important in this is setting up flagship projects that can concretely contribute to this. For example, in the area of space, maritime capacities, and integrated air and missile defense, which should align with NATO capability priorities. Second, we need to make sure that these new EU policies further strengthen partnerships with NATO, UK, the United States, and other important allies. It's crucial for all of us to work together intensively with partners outside the EU. This is no time to retreat in our own European shell. And third, the Commission must strive to ensure that existing and future EU regulations, for example, around procurement and around the environment, allow for the rapid readiness and deployment of our armed forces. Much of this can be done by cutting red tape, allowing for the improvement of logistics, improve our operational readiness, and our ability to rapidly deploy our troops. To put it very simply, EU legislation should not hinder our armed forces. And recently we have seen in the Netherlands, also by some court verdicts, how it can have a direct impact on the capacity of our Dutch armed forces to train, to act, and to further scale up. And to safeguard this, we need a European Readiness Act to make sure that EU regulations do not stand in the way of our armed forces. Ladies and gentlemen, to conclude, we have our work cut out for us. There's no time to lose because 2025 will be a crucial year. It will be crucial for the battlefields of Ukraine. It will be crucial across NATO's eastern flank. But it will also be crucial when it comes to the discussions that we have in the capital cities of NATO and EU member states in order to remain our unity. For 80 years, and we will celebrate it this year, after the Second World War, many people in the Netherlands have taken our freedom and our security for granted. Of course, in that same period, in those 80 years, our Baltic friends had a completely different experience. But recently, over the last couple of years, we in the Netherlands also came to understand that, as the popular expression goes, the struggle is real. The struggle with Russia is real. We can ask our friends in Kiev, Odessa, and Kharkiv about their personal experience, but we will also hear it from our 3 esteemed colleagues today. And yes, I've experienced the sense of urgency also myself when I visited our armed troops in Lithuania, when I talked to our fighter pilots at the airbase in Estonia, and also when I spoke with our Navy sailors just outside of the port of Tallinn during the maritime exercise that is currently taking place. All of them are currently working closely together with our friends and partners from Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, and also with other EU and NATO allies. We, as the Netherlands, are and we will remain committed to our collective security. So today we are eager to hear your perspective, to discuss your perspectives, because, as I said, it's very simple. Your security borders are our security borders too. Thank you.
Can you put it on? Yeah. Thank you so much, Mr. Brekelmans. I now will hand over to Tim to moderate the panel. And I think that you will take over now again.
Yes.
Please.
Your Excellencies, can I invite you on stage to start our moderated panel discussion? I just wanted to remind everyone that this entire conversation is on the record. It's literally being recorded. And also, if you ask a question, this is part of the public record. Thank you, Minister Brekelmans, for that.
Tell me now, after the speech.
Yes. Well, for that very comprehensive outline, the challenges we face and the priorities that we need to set. Let's start off our discussion by asking our guests from the Baltic states to kick off with some remarks. And I would like to go in the reverse alphabetical order. So, Madam Minister, to start with you, and then we'll move our way right, if that is all right with you. The floor is yours.
Okay, so I just have a technical question. Should I speak from here or go there? Doesn't matter.
You can stay here if you feel comfortable staying here.
Okay. So actually, I think that what Minister Brekelmans said gives a very good platform for our discussion, and I couldn't agree more with every single word that was told. But I think we are far beyond now the moment where Baltic states could save, probably for the first year of the invasion to Ukraine, of the massive invasion to Ukraine, that we told you so. Yeah, we did. But the speed with which we are undertaking decisions regarding funding, regarding enhancing our capabilities, regarding the speed of or the boost of defense industry is simply not enough. We have learned and shared a lot of beautiful phrases like too little, too late, right? And, well, nothing changed, actually. But in this case, I think that the new phrase, which is my favorite, is that every tank which is destroyed in Ukraine is the tank which will not threaten our borders. And maybe that one will be more efficient because I think we can visualize pretty well, especially those of us who have grown up in the families that were persecuted, imprisoned, murdered by Russian regime for half a century. And I'm really happy to hear words that Baltics are friends of Netherlands. We do need friends. And Netherlands' position, especially regarding lifting restrictions for Ukraine to use any weapons provided to them for deep strikes, is essential. Can you imagine being able to defend yourselves without destroying enemy assets, which are then raining on the heads of your citizens? So therefore, one more challenge we're facing is hypocrisy. And since we are in the audience of people who, I think, understand very clearly, with open eyes, what that may mean to us in the coming 5 or 6 years, that means that hypocrisy must be over too. If we are talking about efficient defense, that means not only supplying Ukraine with weapons, ammo, trainings, and etc., but also not interfering with Ukraine's defense. And then one more thing is, if we are talking about our defense industry capabilities, then we also need to help ourselves by changing certain legal regulations. And we have talked about that a little bit during our morning session. We really need to admit that if we are not in the peacetime anymore, then the peacetime legal regulation is also redundant. Then a couple of practical moments about Ukraine. Numbers sometimes do matter. So at least 0.25% GDP for Ukraine is important. I'm very proud to be in the company of states who have exceeded that quite significantly. We have ourselves done also a little bit better than planned. We allocated almost 0.28% of GDP for Ukraine last year, and we will continue this year. We are hoping also to move forward. And one of the areas is investing in Ukraine's defense industry. When we talk to our partners and friends, if anybody has a problem with, for example, finding where to invest additional funds for defense, or how to absorb them in the course of a year. Sometimes, well, financial decisions are tricky. You can always throw money at Ukrainian defense industry. 17 billion is the gap that we have to fill. So I think that's easy to make a decision. And then also to connect the dots. Like, for example, when we are talking about Baltic Defence Line, it goes on land and on sea as well, even though we say that Baltic Sea is NATO Sea. Well, as long as NATO Sea is crossed every day by hundreds of ships of shadow fleet from Russia and China, and successfully playing games with our data cables, our electric energy connections, our pipelines, then is it really a NATO Sea? And are we really not able to do more? I'm really glad that Secretary General Rutte made certain decisions quite swiftly, and that, I think, is a very good start. But I would dare to say start, because we also need more. The more present we are in the Baltic Sea, the more the Baltic Sea is actually NATO Sea. And then regarding another number, 2% is the number that we need to forget, as if it didn't exist anymore. I'm really happy to hear that you reached 2%, and then I think it's a start to move forward. I know it's difficult. We all are having difficult discussions with our prime ministers and finance ministers, but just like when the house is on fire, we don't organize public procurement for the water. Just like when the house is on fire, we are not thinking, oh, maybe it's going to be too expensive to have 10 buckets of water instead of 8. We need to extinguish fire. Temperature is rising, and when the fire starts, it's going to be a little bit too late. Lithuania is going to invest almost 4% GDP to defense this year, and we understand that we need to move beyond that. And we also understand that national instruments are not going to be enough. So European instruments will be necessary. European investment banks' careful view towards anything related to military and defense needs to be changed. Our ability to generate funds, just like we generated funds, for example, for pandemic relief fund, just like we generated funds for Green Deal. So these show that we are able to make decisions regarding finances efficiently and swiftly if there is a risk to our survival. In pandemics, unfortunately, certain decisions took massive deaths of our citizens. Let's not wait for that again. Let's make certain decisions now while we can actually prevent that from happening. And unified response is what is really important, and there is a lot to work on, starting with legislation and certain conventions and certain shortening of the procedures, because, okay, last word that I wanted to mention, bureaucracy is a threat to national security. Not bureaucracy in a good way. We all need procedures and standards and platforms, but unnecessary bureaucracy has become also a threat. We sometimes joke with Germans, but it's not really clear, what is pressing us more. But nevertheless, that's one of the things that we need to go through and cut it off.
Thank you, Madam Minister, for not mincing words and laying out so clearly the strategic considerations from your part. Let's move on. Minister, may I give you the word?
Yes, of course you may. Thank you. First of all, thanks a lot, Ruben, to you for excellent welcome and discussions, and of course for our cooperation. So we highly value the cooperation among the like-minded, and I think it's important all the time to strengthen our like-mindedness and to also act in the manner of like-minded nations. And I think we are doing it in a proper way. Thank you as well, team, and of course the team of the Hague Center for Strategic Studies for hosting us. It's always, I think, important to have the public debate, to involve society. We discuss about societal engagement, so we have to voice our concerns, visions, deeds, also to society, to our people. We are at conflict. So that's why, as Ruben, you said, that 2025 is crucial. I would even add to this that every day is and will be crucial as well. So since there is absolutely this understanding of urgency, understanding of what threat we are facing the threat of undemocratic countries, authoritarian states, aggressive countries, which come back to the 19th century logic of imperialist expansionism, and we have to deal with this. We have to constrain, contest, challenge those instincts, because especially for small nations like us, the international rules-based order is absolutely crucial for our survival, for stability of the world, and for, at the very end, also for development and security of our people. Conflicts are about military plans, but already as was mentioned, it's about industry, industrial preparedness, about economic preparedness, and it's also about the will. So the will is crucial here as well. The will of thinking, acting from positions of strength. And it, of course, first of all applies to our activities, our approach to what happens in Ukraine. It is Russia's aggressiveness, what we experience, the brutal invasion, brutal violation of international norms, and that's why we cannot even think about negotiating, thinking, acting from positions of the weakness. So the strengths, the position of strength, absolutely here is decisive, that we should engage, if we engage with aggressor countries, only from positions of strength. So with regard to Ukraine, and I think this should always be kept in mind, yes, it's 3 years of brutal, tragic war, the human loss. All of us would like to have the peace, all of us, and I think not least, the most, this is what exactly Ukrainians would like to have a peace. But at the same time, once more, it should be just peace. And to have a just peace, position of strength is crucial. The financial support, of course, it starts from us, from here. And the Baltic countries, yes, we've been already facing with aggressor countries for years, decades, centuries. The understanding that supporting Ukraine is crucial for all of us, for our values, for our interests, for security of the Euro-Atlantic community. And in this regard, also the funding, financial contributions are extremely important. This shows the will, this shows the commitment. This provides opportunity, the basis from speaking and acting from positions of strength. Yes, we all have 0.25% of GDP for the military support to Ukraine. And it goes about equipment, about training of Ukrainian soldiers. All 3 Baltic nations also have a leadership role in capability coalitions. There are 8 capability coalitions. 3 are being led or co-led by Baltic countries. Also Netherlands, of course, contributes strongly, and we are very grateful for this. Latvia leads a drone coalition. And of course, I think it is important that we are efficient also with those coalitions. Let's not forget about strategic vision. The Hague summit, this will be, I think, very important topic on the table, how we make next steps with irreversibility, what we all agreed upon in Washington summit, of Ukraine's NATO membership. Also, the EU membership should be very clear for Ukraine, for countries which are fighting for the values and interests of our communities and people, which are fulfilling also all conditions to become the NATO and EU allies. And Ukraine is certainly the top priority in this regard with strategic vision to proceed and help them also to integrate into Euro-Atlantic community. Then I would add on Russia. Yes, let's not underestimate what we are dealing with. Russia's advantage, in a sense, is absolute disregard for human life. And of course, it is difficult to escalate to that level what Russia does. We always will be willing, democratic countries always will be willing to protect our people, our lives, our human dignity. This is not, apparently, tragically, case for Russia. Let's not underestimate this brutality of war, what Russia can escalate. But at the same time, let's not overestimate. Let's not fall into a trap of weakness, of thinking. Because Russia has its weaknesses, Russia has its challenges, and certainly there is also for NATO and EU to approach things in a common joint manner, also to actually to push on those weaknesses. NATO, I think we've done quite considerable steps forward with funding, as was mentioned. Yes, more than 20 countries are more than 2%, but with change of administration in the United States, let's be realistic. The requirements, kind requests invitations to spend more, to invest more, to have a fair burden sharing will be just increasing. And of course, on the one hand, there are 23 countries, more than 2%. If you look around the alliance, it's 2.7% along 32 countries. But if we exclude United States, it would be just a little bit more than 2%. 2% is not enough. So certainly we must increase our numbers. All three Baltic countries, again, more than 3%. This year, Latvia 3.5%, next year 3.7%, and actually already next year we might be approaching 4%. So we believe also investment, funding is important. But it's not about only funding, it's not only about investment. It's about industry, it's about implementing regional plans, it's about solidarity, it's about making brigades in Eastern flank efficient. And again, it's Eastern flank, but Hanno and myself, we always underline, it's not Eastern flank, there is one NATO. All flanks are part of one NATO. There is no that some countries are less secure and some countries are more secure. Actually, as your compatriot, Mr. Rutte, just said, if we are not spending more, considerably more, we have to start prepare ourselves for Russian courses, Russian language courses. It was just said few days ago. So, well, I would not perhaps be so dramatic, but at the same time, I realize sort of his major thrust of this, major thinking behind it. So that's why, of course, the regional plans implementation of the defending the whole NATO, one NATO, is absolutely crucial in this regard. And it's what we have to do nationally, the homework, but also what we have to do, of course, on a regional basis, on a basis among the allies. I think that my time might be running out. I will be willing also to elaborate on this in sort of also in the Q&A part. But of course, we have to make big steps. The defending our border, which is external border of EU and NATO. That's why Baltic Defence Line. What we see in Ukraine, 19th century imperialistic expansionist ambitions, the 20th century trench warfare, brutal trench warfare, and 21st century technologies. Still, we have to be ready for all of those activities, all of those instincts. We have to be also ready for it. Trench warfare, and that's why also the conventional approach, defending our border, strengthening our border, of course, with modern technologies, modern means, absolutely is crucial. And Baltic Defence Line is about this. It's about the thinking that we have to defend every inch of NATO territory. But it goes not only every inch of NATO territory on the land. What we realize is every inch of NATO territory in air. Latvia faced a very serious incident. Russian Shahed drone crashed on Latvian soil, and I would add on NATO soil back in September. It also once more underlines how important it is also to defend our airspace, how important it is to adjust, how important it is to implement a rotational model, to defend our skies, to create efficient air defenses. And it's not just about a land-based air defense, it's also about air policing, the air squadrons, jet fighter squadrons in the Baltic countries, or generally in the perimeter of the border of NATO. And again, we are grateful for the Netherlands' contribution to the Baltic air policing, and also, of course, sending contingent also to Lithuania. And also it shows and underlines the importance of new technologies, that it's not only that we have to face and deal, but we have to be also with the initiative and with proactiveness and outpace, outwill, outsmart also, let's say, Russian aggressor, sort of the partners of neighbors or whatever we call. So that's why also the drone technologies and drone coalition, as a matter of fact, is important step, not only supporting Ukraine, but also making us realize how important it is to develop all drone technologies in terms of what obtaining our own capabilities, but also, of course, developing the industrial base, innovation, the testing grounds, what exactly we are doing. Last but not least, hybrid warfare, hybrid activities. We do a lot in terms of conventional military defense. It's very difficult also in challenging to face those hybrid attacks, be ready always for all those hybrid attacks. What we see in the Baltic Sea right now with those incidents against infrastructure. And once more, it's about our credibility. It's also about our credibility, how we act in terms of defending our infrastructure, defending in a cyberspace, in undersea infrastructure, in the information space. So that's why let's be ready that those hybrid activities will just be increasing, and we will have to adjust also to, let's say, those activities. And it is at the very end about our credibility. And once more, last but not least, involvement of society. The societal resilience is crucial in this regard. So this event, I think, is an excellent contribution to have discussion, to raise awareness, to share the thoughts, to share the best practices. So thank you once more for having us.
Thank you, Minister Sprūds, also for articulating the Latvian views so forcefully. You remind me of that old Greek historian who speaks about a time in which there's a renaissance of power politics, then the strong do as they please, and the weak will have to suffer what they must. And so, in that context, yes, small and middle powers will need to stick together and think about how they can defend and protect themselves. Before we take up some of these elements that you touched upon for discussion, I wanted to give the floor first to the Estonian Minister of Defence, Mr. Hanno Pevkur.
Thank you very much, and it's good to be back in The Hague and also here in the HCSS. So, Ruben, thank you very much for hosting us, and thank you all of you who took the time to come here and discuss about these important topics. Very briefly, a couple of remarks from the history, present days, and what's going to be in the future. Well, the advantage of the human being has always been that we can learn. We can learn from the history, and we can maybe also adjust our behavior. Now, when we look into the history, then I will just give an example from Estonian independence war. Estonia lost during the independence war from 1918 to 1920 as killed or wounded around 20,000 people. To put that into the scale, this would mean around 800,000 Ukrainians, or almost a city of Hague. So 400,000 people in Dutch comparison. So this was the sacrifice, this was the number, what we lost during our independence war in 2 years. And this shows perfectly that Russians do not care about the human lives. And I believe that, we should learn from this, that it's not about the Russian economy. It is not about Russian technology. It is not about Russian military equipment. If they have the goal, if they have the wish, they don't care about the people, they just throw the people to the meat grinder. And we have to take care of that and take this into the consideration that it should not be our estimation that in one moment Russians will be exhausted. No, they don't. They won't be. The second example from the history is about the economic point of view, actually, and what the occupation means. Before the Second World War, Estonian economy, comparing to the Finnish economy, was about the same. So we had about the same GDP per capita, even a bit higher than Finns. During the 50 years of occupation, the Estonian GDP per capita was reduced by around 17 times comparing to Finland. So when we got back our independence in 1991, our GDP per capita was a bit over $1,000. The same time Finns had 17,000. So today the gap is around 2 times. We are catching up, and we have at the moment the same, all of us have the same around what Spain has. But still, just to give you an example that what the occupation means, we do not want to be back in the situation that we are losing 20,000 Estonians or losing in our wealth around 20 times. So just to understand the lessons learned from the history. Now the present days, why we are talking so much about the Hague Summit, why we are talking about so much about the collective defense, and why Estonia and other Baltic states said from the very beginning after independence that we will never be alone again. Because we know that stronger we are together. or together we are stronger, sorry. And to understand that, the only thing Russia understands is the force, is the strength. And of course, we have to show them that not only we are together, but also we are stronger. Because Russia also has the intelligence. So it's not the question that they cannot understand what is happening in Dutch military or what is happening in Estonian military. They have the understanding. So as we have the understanding what is happening in Russian military. So this is why the capability targets we've set in NATO are so important. And this is why not only President Trump, also many others, we are talking about more defense spendings. Is it 3% or something else? Doesn't matter. The point is that 2% is not enough, what also Andris mentioned. 2% is just not enough. And the reason behind that is not that we are spending not enough today, but the reason behind that is that after the collapse of the Soviet Union, the European defense spending dropped to less than 1%. During the Cold War, 40 years back, we spent in Europe around 4%, and then we didn't have any war. So when we were able to spend 4% during the Cold War, then we have no excuse to say today that we cannot spend 3% to guarantee the peace and security for our people. So when Trump is saying 5%, well, maybe this is a bit over of some expectations, but the reality is that 2% is not enough. And we have to just see what are our capabilities, what are the force posture of Russia, what also Ruben mentioned, that when we take the open plans, not even the secret plans of Russians, about their posture close to our neighborhood, then we see that this formation or this size of Russian military will be doubled in many cases, even tripled or quadrupled or even 7 times more what we have seen today. And trust me, these people at the moment, these 600,000 soldiers in Ukraine, Russian army, will not go back to Yakutia because they will not go there to get $100 per month, as they're earning today $2,000 per month in Ukraine. So they want to earn more, and that means that they will stay in the army, they will stay in the Russian military, and they will be in the neighborhood of NATO. So we're talking today about the Baltic Defence Line. Yes, this is just one of the many measures we are doing. Baltic Defence Line, also now Poland is doing the same, Finland is doing the same. So from up north until the Ukrainian border, we are doing the Baltic Defence Line or the Eastern Flank Defence Line, however you call it. The point is this is something we can do during the peacetime. The same what we are doing, ramping up the industry, the same what we are doing, bringing new capabilities into our military. So this is what we can do during the peacetime. And of course, this is just a proof to you that we are the first defense line. We are the first line of defense to keep the alliance safe. Yes, NATO has been successful for 75 years. Unfortunately, today we have to discuss also that there are tensions between the allies. When President-elect Trump is talking about Greenland or Canada, we have seen tensions between Greece and Turkey for a long time, but this should not be the time for these tensions or to increase these tensions. This time today should be the time to build the bridges, to build the unity, and to increase the defense spendings, because actually, when we agree that the minimum will be 3%, let's assume that the Hague summit will be historical, and we will say that, as we said in Wales 2014, that then we said that it should be 2%. Then it took still tens of years to reach 2% for 23 countries. Now we still have 9 countries who are not investing 2%. But still, let's assume that we will have a new target, 3% as a minimum. then still we have NATO capability targets. And when we go country by country, then we will see that even 3% is not enough. Then we will see that some countries have to invest 3.5, some countries 4, some countries 4.2%, depending on their lack of capabilities, what has been accumulated in last 30 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So this is the reason behind of these talks, where we see that Trump is coming out with 5%, and many are saying, also Mark Rutte is saying 3.7 or whatever the percentage is. So, and last but not least, let's do not forget that we have two organizations. NATO as an alliance, as a military alliance, should be the alliance which takes care of our security and military security. European Union, as a mostly civilian organization, economical body, should take care of our financial sustainability and also help us to fill these gaps collectively. And this is why the white paper of the European Commission is so important. This is why, for instance, is it defense bond or something else as a finance mechanism is so important, because the new MFF in European Union will be in force only in 28. So we cannot wait 3 years more to do something for our collective defense. And for this collective defense, we can do something together which helps all of us. Is it ammunition? Is it air defense? There are specific sectors or specific fields where we can do more. So I believe that we will have a very good discussion later on, and I'm ready to discuss on all these topics. But the main bottom line is that from The Hague, I really do hope that we will have very good messages coming out. And it is a historical event in that way that, or in that sense, that we will have some good results, not only for NATO as an alliance, but also for Ukraine, because we know that they are fighting for our freedom at the moment.
Thank you, Minister Pevkur, for a very insightful and incisive expose. It's 11:15. We have about 55 minutes for a moderated discussion, and I promised to bring you in, and you're going to keep me to that promise. There's a couple of themes that I think that have already appeared in this discussion. The first really pertains to the deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area. We're talking about the Baltic Defence Line, but our various ministers have already raised the issue that there is a Baltic Defence Line on the ground, perhaps, but it's also about the air, it's also about the sea. So I wanted to ask our ministers to share their views on what such a posture looks like, what are critical capabilities that we need, and what are critical capability gaps. That's one theme. And I'm already giving it away, so the ministers have a moment to think about it. The second one that has been spoken of is societies, societal resilience, societal defense, whole-of-nation defense. If you look at conflict theaters around the world, and not just in Ukraine, you see a return of the role of the people. And so essentially a reliance on the regulars may not suffice. Do we need conscription? Do we need something else? How can we engage our societies to either participate or support, should there be a conflict? 3, there's of course the issue of defense industries and NATO collaboration. In order to sustain a war of attrition, you need to be able to churn out massive numbers of capabilities, high-tech but also low-tech. So what does that mean for European defense industries? But what, and Minister Brekelmans referred to that, what does that mean for European champions? Of course, we want to have European champions, but I can also imagine that the smaller and middle powers don't want to be left out in that effort. And so I'm very curious to hear your views on what that looks like. Finally, there's 2 things. One, and I was very pleased that this was raised, modern battlefields show that there are combinations of 20th century and 21st century technology that are relevant, I would say necessary, to win the fight. And so we may be at the risk of rebuilding our 20th century militaries rather than investing in 21st century technology. So I would be also keen to hear your views on how to strike that balance. And then I'm sure we'll somehow in discussion we'll end up talking about intra-alliance solidarity and who will be joining the White House in 2 weeks. So once it comes up, by all means. Madam Minister, may I start off with you and ask you about that first theme that I wanted to raise? Deterrence by denial, complemented by deterrence by punishment. What does that look like? What are challenges and how can we overcome them?
So as I understand, you want to focus on the sea instead of land.
No, both. Excuse me.
Okay.
As you wish.
So I will start with the sea, because for me that was quite an interesting, not probably entirely unexpected, but an interesting beginning of my term. I was sworn in on the 12th of December. On the 25th of December, we had Christmas gift of having more cables and electric connections cut in the Baltic Sea. And as I mentioned in my initial speech, we also have to learn to connect the dots. What is really interesting is that all these incidents in the Baltic Sea somehow started basically in 2023. Before that, for decades, somehow ships were not dragging anchors on the seabed all the time around, sometimes for example, almost 100 kilometers. And the same is happening in Taiwan Strait. Also, since 2023, these incidents, absolutely identical, not similar, identical, are happening. And these may be ships that are Russian ships, Chinese ships, or ships registered somewhere in some islands or some very, very remote countries. And we'll understand what we're talking about. Shadow fleet, overcoming sanctions, funding for Russian war against Ukraine, and preparation for the next wars. So therefore, this is really a place where defense line is a lot about hybrid warfare, not only about conventional. It's probably the easiest to talk about conventional warfare, counter-mobility measures, financial instruments that we need from European Union, our combined capabilities as NATO alliance. But regarding hybrid warfare, it's also about combining very different measures. So I mentioned again before when I was making my initial speech about legislation. So admitting that current legislation is redundant, basically maritime law, international agreements, and our national law and European directives, they do not function in the times where we are not at the time of war, but we are not already in the time of peace. So one of the things that we are also doing is certain changes. We need to make certain changes that we are absolutely on the same page, allowing ourselves more flexibility, more authorization, and easier joint actions. We are not going to go into details right now, but believe me, we are going to get tough because Baltic Sea is small, and we are small, and we are all very vulnerable. And Baltic Sea is full of infrastructure, and it's not actually only about the Baltic states. It's about all the states in the region. So in that way, in my opinion, when we talk about hybrid warfare and undersea infrastructure, then Baltic Defence Line extends to all the countries of the Baltic Sea. And in my opinion, that's, again, an added value, because the bigger coalitions we have, the more efficient we are. Just like with Ukraine, creation of those 8 coalitions, Latvia, as Minister Andris said, is leading drone coalition, we are leading the mining coalition. And then what happened? We became more effective in accumulating support, in providing that support where it's necessary, targeting what is really the most painful. So national capabilities that are helping on specific spots in the Baltic Sea, combined joint operations by NATO and involving countries not only from the Baltic Sea, but also coming to help us from the other countries. Changes in the legislation so that common solutions, both nationally and internationally, would correspond to current geopolitical challenges. and connecting the dots, for example, Indo-Pacific to the Baltic Sea. I think that are the directions that we need to walk.
Excellent. I'm going to ask our Minister Brekelmans to respond, but I would like to ask our guests from the Baltic states to ask them this precise question. If you think about deterrence and defense of the Euro-Atlantic area, we're also talking about not the eastern flank, the eastern border, as you just said. There is the Baltic Defence Line. What types of capabilities, or maybe one level higher, policies do we need to implement in order to make sure that Russia is deterred there?
Yes, we have committed ourselves to defend every inch of NATO territory. That commitment has been strong, and certainly we have also to make alliance credible, to make the specific steps, specific capabilities to implement it. And it's not just about the land, every inch on the land. In NATO, we speak about 5 domains: land, air, sea, space, cyber. And we see that now we are focused in this specific moment very much on what happens in the sea, but things develop also in a cyberspace, things develop also in a space in general. So that's why, of course, let's be ready for different kind of activities from our adversary side. NATO is a defensive alliance. The primary target is defense. But certainly when we discuss our capabilities, we also have to create capabilities which are able to deter and defend by denial, but also by punishment. So that's why, for instance, deep precision strikes are extremely important. Russia has a belief that it can escalate always more than other countries can do. Mm-hmm. Let's be ready for this, and let's be ready also to actually escalate. The joint activity in this regard is absolutely crucial. In the Baltic Sea, when defending also airspace, rotational model I once more underline, using our capabilities. Yes, of course, industry is absolutely crucial in this regard, but it's not just about industry. It's about also collecting, assembling efficiently using those capabilities. What we have right now. Once more, we have shortage of land-based air defense systems. Industry still has to catch up, and also actually still has to receive a clear signal that we are willing to arm ourselves, that we are ready for a conflict for coming years, that it's not just for a few months or few years. We are facing Russia, which is expansionist by nature. And that's why, of course, we need to give those signals to industry. Industry also has to catch up and provide. But still there are resources now at our disposal to implement regional plans, to implement rotational model, to use our jet fighters, for instance, to defend the skies, to adjust our procedures. Certainly we can do a lot in this regard as well. And Dovilė was referring also to changing some of the interpretations of the international law in the sea, because it cannot go unpunished that, let's say, just our cables are being destroyed regularly. Last but not least, yes, it's a national task as well. What I think all 3 Baltic countries are doing, and of course society here is a stakeholder, the key, the central piece behind it, the comprehensive defenses. It involves, of course, mobilization of society, mobilization of resources and capabilities, and also making practical steps in terms of defending our borders, which is a border of NATO.
It is. Minister Pevkur.
Very briefly. 3 topics: sea domain, society, and industry. First, regarding the sea domain and hybrid warfare. Well, one thing we have to understand that is now we are naming that as a hybrid warfare, but it's actually nothing else just as a tactic of the war. Because in hybrid warfare, actually you are trying to find the ways how to beat your opponent. So it doesn't matter, is it a chess game, or it is the war, you find the ways to how to beat your enemy, your adversaries. When we go back in history, we all know the Trojan horse. So you will find new ways how to surprise your enemy and how to get the advantage on the battlefield. So when you talk about the hybrid warfare, what Russia is conducting at the moment towards the West, the main aim of this is to take our focus from Ukraine to deal with other problems and to talk about it. Is it Baltic Sea? Is it Finnish Gulf? Is it cables or something else? Or is it an attack somewhere here in the Western Europe? Implications on the elections, something else? We are focusing on other things which like implicates or which impacts the society more, as the war in Ukraine. That we cannot focus on the war in Ukraine. We have to focus on the interventions during our elections or something else. So this is why Russia is conducting these hybrid attacks. When we talk about the sea domain, then yes, I fully agree with Andris that, well, we have 5 domains, and it doesn't matter. We have to be successful everywhere. Cyber is important the same way as sea or land domain. Regarding the society, it is important that that kind of like discussions what we have here, or also in the schools, that we are explaining to our young population, younger generation, why it is important to understand either hybrid attacks or why it is important to take care of your security. It's not only the peace what we are living in. Why it is important to understand the history, that there is a hostile neighbor in Europe, which is Russia, and their goal is still to re-establish the Russian Empire. And that means that they don't care about their neighbors. So, and of course, the societal resilience and readiness is important because, you know, in one moment, especially at the moment when we take also the long-range missiles and everything, when Russia or Putin decides to go to the full-scale war with Europe or the West or NATO, then you know, all the rockets can fly also to Amsterdam or The Hague. So it doesn't matter, is it Riga, Tallinn, or Vilnius? The flight time from from somewhere in Russia to The Hague, the difference is maybe 1 minute for the ballistic missile. So, you know, to understand that the scales are different as it was during the First World War when the tank didn't move quicker than 5 kilometers per hour. So just to understand, but it's, of course, I understand it's difficult. We've been living in peace for more than 80 years, so it's not easy. But the reality is that it has changed. And regarding the industry, my only understanding is that when we have more money in defense and in industry, then what the industry needs is long-term commitments, long-term contracts. When we don't have, when we have just the promises, it's a private sector. So, and I do not see that we will be successful with the state-owned industry, which means that the industry will stay private, and then the private sector will not make investments as long as they don't have the long-term commitments. But there, we should have more joint procurements to have better results.
Excellent. And I always remind people I speak to that in case of a war, US forces would come to our support. Where would they be off-boarded? Where would they enter Europe? Through Rotterdam. So this is a key issue from the Western side of the alliance as well. Minister Brekelmans, I would like to ask you to respond, but perhaps you could also share some thoughts on the broader societal readiness, because over the past few months, but also weeks, there has been a lot of discussion in Dutch society about how to be ready and how to be ready for a large-scale conventional war.
Yeah. No, so I very much agree with most or maybe everything that has been said. I think when it comes to hybrid warfare, and especially undersea, I think it's important that we increase our maritime presence. If you look at the NATO Standing Maritime Group, this mission, we as the Netherlands are involved with 2 vessels. A third will be added. But even with only ships, you know, it's impossible to patrol the entire Baltic Sea or the entire North Sea. So we also need sensors, we need to have drones, we need to make sure that Russia understands that we see them, that we see what they do, because detection in this point is also a way of deterrence. Second, we need to make sure that the responsibilities are clear. And I know that HCSS has been doing a lot of work on this topic, because in the Netherlands we have seen that ministries, but also private sector companies are pointing at each other. And I think this especially in this time, we cannot accept it anymore. We need to make sure what the responsibilities are. We as Minister of Defence, we cannot protect every piece of infrastructure. Also the North Sea or the Baltic Sea, there are no war zones in the sense that there's no wartime regulations. But we need to make sure that the responsibilities are clear, and if we as Minister of Defence need to do a bit more, then we need to make that very clear. Third, and I very much agree with what Andris had said about it, the legal frameworks. We should further reassess our legal definitions, because at this point it's really impeding us from acting, and we need to make sure that we have better frameworks, better definitions in order to act. And fourth, in the end, we need political will, because if you look at the hybrid activities, we have, on an EU level, we have a hybrid toolbox, we have a cyber toolbox, we have a whole closets full of toolboxes, but in the end it's about using them, and you need to have the political will to use them. And this morning also we talked about sanctions. We see that the US has now further expanded the sanctions towards the Russian shadow fleet, and we as EU should do the same, to make sure that those vessels, that those are not only sanctioned by the United States, but also by the EU, because we see that it has a major impact, and still there's a lot to do. And also on EU level, a lot of capacity and capabilities to increase, because very often that's also limiting our capacity to act, because we are not sharing information enough between the European countries, and then on the EU level we don't have the capacity to list those vessels and then to enforce those sanctions. So when it comes, that's about the hybrid activities. When it comes to resilience, I think if you compare the Netherlands to the 3 Baltic states, we have a lot of work to do on every level. So starting with the individual, on the individual level, of course, our citizens also need to be more prepared and to be more aware of a potential disruption of our society. And of course, in the Dutch debate, then there's a lot of attention about the emergency packages that people can order, and sometimes people are laughing about it, and that's fine. But what I have seen over the last couple of weeks is that people are taking it more seriously. We all had, over the Christmas break, we had dinners and conversations with our families, and I hear from many people that this was a topic of conversation. And some people are saying, it's people are exaggerating the threat and, still ridiculing it a little bit, but many people are considering it seriously. And it's not only about, are you prepared yourself, but also your family, people in your street, people who are vulnerable. Is it clear who is helping each other? That's one. But second, and I think that's even more important, is that companies, organizations, different levels of government are prepared. And I have spoken to some cities, municipalities who have done these simulations, who have done these emergency drills. And what they all come to the same conclusion is that we are not prepared, because we are all used to having electricity, communication, internet all the time. And if you look then, do we have an alternative? If those systems are not in place, then we do not have those alternatives. We do need to make sure that we are prepared, because if there is a disruption like this, and we know that Russia is preparing for this, we see that Russia is in our digital systems. If something happens like that, we don't want to have social chaos. We need to make sure then that our organizations are prepared. And third is about military preparedness, and also about how society should and could help the military when it's necessary. I sometimes say, in peacetime, often the question is, what can the military do for society? In wartime, the question is the other way around. What can society do for the military? And there you see, and that's related to my remarks about the Readiness Act, is that we have many regulations at this point which are impeding our ability to speed up and scale up our efforts. So we do need to make sure that it's clear what the regulations and the responsibilities are, also when tensions are rising. You mentioned the example of Rotterdam, which is, I think, very interesting, because if there is a crisis situation and we need to have a lot of military equipment and also military personnel needs to arrive in the Netherlands to the port of Rotterdam, then who's in charge? Is it the mayor of Rotterdam, or am I in charge, a Minister of Defence? It's unclear. It's unclear. It's clear now. It's the mayor of Rotterdam. But if we are approaching a wartime situation, it's unclear, because we have our regulations which are from the 60s, but they are like wartime regulations, but we don't have any grey zone regulations. And we need to make sure that in that case, those responsibilities are clear. I don't want to have any arguments or any discussions with the mayor of Rotterdam when there is something happening, for example, at the eastern flank, and we need to act, and we don't need to discuss. So I think we need to do all of this. We need to make sure that people increase their awareness, that they have a bigger sense of urgency on the individual level. We need to have it with our companies and with organizations, and we need to increase our military preparedness and to make sure that we know how society can help us at different stages when conflicts are coming up.
Terrific. We're nearing 11:40, so I'm about to open the floor to questions from the audience. But there's one issue that I wanted to bring to the fore, which relates to, we're talking about political willingness, and then there's indeed societal willingness. What can society do for the war-fighting effort, or for the defense and deterrence effort? And in that context, civil-military relations are of the utmost importance, and also engaging societies and populations. So I wanted to ask you first, Minister Brekelmans, and then ask your colleagues from the Baltic states, as to what is the thinking right now on, I just said in my introduction, a reliance on the regulars may not suffice. But if you think about growing the armed forces and engaging with society, are you thinking of reintroducing conscription, or are you thinking of other models in order to bolster larger societal readiness?
We are thinking about other models, and the reason is that there is still a lot of potential which is untapped. So if you look at, for example, in the Netherlands, we have the service year, dienjaar, which is voluntary. We are scaling that up, but we started quite small to see if it works, and it works. So people applying for this, around 80% wants to stay in the military. The numbers are still quite low, but even if we go towards not hundreds a year, but thousands a year, the amount of applications is far exceeding that.
Okay.
And basically on every vacancy that we have, or every when it's about every element of the military, we see that there is a lot of appetite to work for the military, because people are looking for a sense of meaning in the work that they do, and they do see that if they work for the Ministry of Defence or for one of our parts of our military, then it's very important and gives a sense of meaning. So for me, and also for Gijs Tuinman, the State Secretary, who's working on this on a daily basis, the biggest challenge is to make sure that we can absorb those applicants, and that we can make sure that when people express their willingness to work for our military, that they do not need to wait for months and months in order for us then to tell them where they can work, but to make sure that we can do this much faster. And I think if we can make sure that we not only have a smart military like we have now, a military of professionals with a lot of expertise, but if we can add more quantity to that, in a way in which we have people that are motivated and are not forced to work for us, I think in the Netherlands that works much better than if we say now, okay, every youngster 18 years old needs to go to the military and then basically stand somewhere and, I don't know, protect something which is not so relevant. We need to make sure there is now societal support for the military, And we need to make sure that we keep that, because it's quite fragile, I think. If we make mistakes, if we do the wrong thing, then we can also lose that strong support that we have right now.
Excellent. Are there things that we can learn from your side, Madam Minister? What does that look like in your country?
So yeah, I think sharing good practices and learning, all of us, learning from each other is really important. So actually, to start, I would say that probably what is the most important is that everyone knows exactly where we are supposed to be and what we are supposed to do. So to paraphrase the popular saying, stay calm and mobilize is what is our goal. And mobilize not only in the military sense, but only mobilizing your capacity, your skills, your colleagues, your organization, and etc. So conscription is what we are doing, and we're scaling it up. We are raising the numbers, but we're at the same time resolving challenges related to personnel and infrastructure. At the same time, we're expanding our own national military infrastructure, and we are building infrastructure for the German brigade, which will be deployed in Lithuania in 2027. And we are also building our national division. And with our new government, our first decision was to significantly increase funds available for defense so that we can have our national infantry division until 2030, because, as I said, time is pressing upon us. But we're also exploiting, I think, rather widely other other formats between civil and military, such as paramilitary organizations. So Lithuanian Rifleman Union, I think, is one wonderful example. It has grown a few times in the past 3 years. We have integrated both military units, those citizens who are going to join armed forces, the combat riflemen, but also civil riflemen who are going to be in support in logistics, doing whatever needs to be done to support our army. And also we have introduced this new concept of commandant's offices, even though it was initially a military concept which was supposed to be activated only during the times of war. But we are now building sort of centers, I would call them centers of excellence, where people who would be ready to join commandant's office during the times of war now are already registering, going through trainings and preparing to be a part of all the structure that would function seamlessly. Our armed forces, our riflemen, our commandants, and our civil administration, because one of the most important things is to remember that functioning of a state is important, be it the time of peace or be it the time of war. So civil defense also encompasses ensuring that. And in our understanding, total defense means that everyone has an obligation, a right, and an obligation to do everything in our power to defend our country. And a very short addition to that, of course, being ready means being able to recognize the threats, level of disinformation, level of outside interference in our political processes, and let me say also bluntly, fragility of national political structures, is also probably on an unprecedented level. Just let's take a look how many governments have been falling and changing in Europe lately, and not only in Europe. And that means that education of our citizens and the preparation is very important.
Excellent. Should I open up the floor to the audience, or do you have anything to add?
Yes.
Yes.
Of course, as always. I would put it in a wider context that we are like-minded in assessing the threat and understanding that we have to act. At the same time, there is diversity within our societies and also among ourselves. And one of our tasks is how to bridge the gap. On the one hand, as Hanno said, look, I mean, we are in many ways vulnerable, all equally, in terms of the ballistic missiles, in terms of the interdependence of the infrastructure, in terms of the commonality of the cyberspace. On the other hand, of course, there is diversity among our nations, how we approach, how much, for instance, we should invest in security. It comes out from geographical location, from historical experience, from size as well. So that's why bridging the gap between, let's say, common understanding that basically we are facing the same threats equally and diversity of our societies is not an easy task. The political leadership, of course, here is very important within Transatlantic Alliance. And it's not a simple task. I would imagine if Ruben would come tomorrow and say, look, I mean, Netherlands has to invest 4%, you might have some political challenges. In Baltic countries, it's vice versa. If you would not say, look, I mean, we need to go up to 4%, we would have political challenges. But that's why, of course, there is a political circumstances which influence things. I would not like just to focus on elections or circumstances. Certainly, this is about societal willingness also and understanding what kind of existential threat it is what we're facing. In the Baltic countries, there is clear understanding that it is about comprehensive defense. As Dovilė said, everyone must be involved. Everyone, every individual is crucial. Also, numbers are crucial, but also the qualitative preparedness is crucial. So we reintroduced conscription. The Estonia had conscription, Lithuania reintroduced conscription back in 2014. We reintroduced conscription in 2022. Now I can add additional political dimension. I am representing Progressive Party. I am now, as a minister, advocating that actually conscription applies to female and male. In Sweden, in Norway, from last year, it was reintroduced starting from 2026. Also, conscription applies to female in these countries. I am moving forward that actually also taking into account that it's comprehensive defense, also female, in a sense, must be conscripted by 2028, approximately the timeline is. But again, this is a societal discussion. It's not so taken for granted. Then we introduced as a mandatory course the military or defense course in our schooling system. Every 16, 17 years old go through the practical training, the skills of survival, resilience, etc., etc. So to some extent already start to prepare also the young people for some kind of also negative scenarios. Then, of course, the information campaigns are extremely important. We have published a number of also the guidelines and books, actually also taking from example from Ukraine, how to act in the situation of war, how to be prepared for situations of war. So in terms of also the awareness raising, in terms of also how we communicate, in terms of the mechanisms, of course, all those things are very much important, and we are moving forward with these steps. So it's comprehensive defense. We realize everyone must be involved.
Excellent.
30 seconds.
Oh, sure.
How to increase the societal resilience. First, ask yourself, every citizen, do you have 7 days supply? Whatever, food, water, heating if needed. So can you be at home 7 days without electricity and food? Secondly, what we are doing in Estonia, we have the higher defense courses for different members of society. So spokespersons, journalists, parliament members, etc. And we have done that for 25 years, 100 people per year. So more than 2,500 people have got an understanding what the defense is. And they are our spokespersons now in the society. Thirdly, 2 years ago, we established the same course for the civil defense. Basically the same, we are bringing every year, 2 times in a year, people from the important positions, journalists, etc., to understand what the civil defense is. What do you have to do? It's the same. Third, we have very quick or very rapid courses for entrepreneurs. They don't have time normally, so we do 1 day, we bring them, we show why they have to be also involved in defense. Yep. And finally, of course, we have the conscription, but we also have the Voluntary Defense League, which has today already 30,000 members, youngsters, boys and girls, women organization. They know what to do during the crisis and during the war. And of course, the combatants which have now 10,000 members plus 10,000 reservists. So in territorial defense, we have 20,000 members. Very briefly.
Thank you for these insights. I'm looking at the floor. Yes, could you please stand up, quickly introduce yourself, and ask a question? The mic is coming your way, so everyone can hear you.
Thank you so much. My name is Anna. I am coming from Ukraine, originally the city of Luhansk. So war has been in my own yard for the past 10 years. I'm living here in The Hague right now, and having listened to all of the speakers here today, I also hear that you are doing tremendous efforts to use NATO troops to train troops in your countries and in Ukraine. However, with the imminent Russian threat, the only people who know how to fight Russians are Ukrainian soldiers. So my question to the ministers is it time for Ukrainian soldiers to start teaching NATO troops and your army specifically? Thank you.
Great question.
I believe that at the moment you have to fight for your own country and for your own people. But that doesn't mean that we are not learning from you. We are learning every day. So we are getting information. Our people are going to Ukraine. Our people are training Ukrainians, and vice versa. During that process, the Ukrainians are training our people. So this is already in process, I believe. And of course, you know, when this war will be over, Ukraine will be a very, very good partner for us to get the information. But I can assure you that we are collecting this information, what the Russians are doing every day.
If I may immediately add, absolutely. So I think there is exchange of training and knowledge all the time. Now, Ukraine is in many ways the most NATO country. What do I mean by this? Actually, so many NATO systems being used and being coordinated. This has always been one of the problems of the NATO as alliance, interoperability. In Ukraine, it's being trained actually in practice in the battlefield. So that's why we can learn a lot. And it's a mutual learning, absolutely. In terms of, again, my favorite topic, and I stop myself here shortly, on drone and drone technologies. We can learn so many things from Ukraine. Things are changing all the time. Industry must all the time adjust. Our armed forces must all the time adjust. We have common projects with Ukrainian side on, let's say, development of also drones, because here we can learn so many things from Ukrainian partners. So that's why, yes, absolutely, Ukraine is doing, of course, bravery in the battlefield, but also contributing to our own adjustments and sort of improving our skills and efficiency and capabilities. And once more, I can repeat, Ukraine will be the 32nd member of NATO. So this is what it will be. This is a reversible path. Thank you.
Mr. Brekelmans, can I just add the question, are we learning, but also are we learning fast enough?
Yeah. I would say it's a big challenge, because I do agree with what Hanno was saying, that we are putting a lot of effort, of course, in exchanging ideas, concepts, information. But I was in Kharkiv myself in the fall. I visited the command center of the Kharkiv Brigade, which is one of the most modern brigades. And if you are there, to me, it felt like being at a tech startup, because most of the people, a majority of the people working there were were civilians, so not military people, and B, were volunteers. And they were all looking at big screens, and they were analyzing data all the time. And they were changing and improving their way of operating every 2 to 3 weeks. Simply said, that's not how the Dutch military is operating at this point. And it's also not how we are training our people. And my concern is that we are now investing a lot of money, billions of money, but we need to make sure that we incorporate that new modern way of working as well. And it's not only about training our people, it's also looking at our doctrines. Because if you look at what level certain assets and capabilities are used, Ukraine is doing that on a much lower level than we would do it with our NATO doctrines. And it is a challenge, because it is what Hanno said as well. You know, Ukraine doesn't have the time to teach 32 countries on how they are operating. We need to find, we are trying to find a balance. I think we should work on it even more to make sure that we learn those lessons without taking too much of the capacity of Ukraine because they need to, first and foremost, to fight a war. But we also need to make sure that if some people within the Dutch military or the Estonian and other Latvian militaries are learning those lessons, we need to make sure that they are also disseminated among our militaries and they are translated into our practices, into our doctrines, into our investments. And I think a lot of work still needs to be done.
Minister Šakalienė.
Okay, so shortly, I think it's important to distinguish three levels: tactical, strategical, and political. And whilst on tactical level, there is a lot to learn. We understand, we all agree that now Ukraine is fighting, but still we are sharing information. But on strategic level, Ukraine is fighting alone. We are supporting Ukraine, but Ukraine is fighting alone. And this means that NATO fight would look different. And also sometimes we should not bear an illusion that it would be similar. And that's why I said hypocrisy should be off. Can you imagine NATO not being allowed to destroy targets? This is not possible, and it should not be possible. And when we talk about Ukraine, here it is. And that means that also, whilst learning certain lessons, we also need to understand that Ukraine's army is the only army in Europe which actually now has de facto experience of wide-scale conventional war. And then, for me, that's the argument for political level. That's the best and the most existential argument why Ukraine needs to be part of NATO alliance. Because then NATO alliance would be an alliance which has not participated in trainings or in missions, but has an actual conventional war experience.
Excellent. We're going to go up to a gentleman there right in the middle.
Hello,
Go ahead.
my name is Mark Duursma from a Dutch newspaper, NRC. Several speakers just said that the legal framework doesn't suffice anymore, that legislation in regard to maritime law doesn't work for what's going on in the Baltic Sea right now. Yesterday, Mr. Rutte, at his press conference in Helsinki, answered to that same question that he doesn't see any need for changes because UNCLOS is still providing enough opportunities. So I was wondering, could you give a concrete example where the legal framework should change?
Excellent. We're going to get to that question, but we're going to take another question first. Sorry. Yeah. Could you stand up there? Yes, Thijs. This gentleman was first, and then we go to the lady in the back. Thank you. Apologies. Yes, go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Jerzy Gierszmik. I'm Mr. Counselor at the Embassy of Poland here in the Hague. First of all, congratulations on gathering the 4 ministers in one room. That's already a big achievement, like a little pre-summit. And also thank you to the ministers for very sobering observations and very realistic ones on the current situation. Actually, Poland shares very much these observations. We feel the threats, and also we share the urgency of needed actions. As part of the European Union motto, we have Security Europe, for example, and this year we are spending 4.7% GDP on defense. My question actually relates to the Baltic Defence Line. As part of the line goes across along the border with Belarus. Could you maybe address the threats emanating from that side? As we all remember, actually Ukraine was attacked also from the territory of Belarus. So how can we and how can NATO minimize the threats coming from there? Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. So a question about the rules and regulation and the status of international law and what needs to change, an example, and a more specific question pertaining to the Baltic Defence Line.
Well, maybe I can start as a lawyer. So,
Yeah.
First, yes, UNCLOS is there, no question. The question is that how you can intervene or react in international waters. In territorial waters, there is no question. The international waters are also divided to economical zone. In Baltic Sea, it's quite good situation that the economical zone is basically covered within the Baltic Sea. When we leave the Danish straits, then we are in open water, then it's different. So, but anyway, the freedom of sailing is there. And the freedom of sailing means that by default you cannot intervene or you cannot onboard. So now you have to find solutions how to onboard. So basically there are different options. One is the environmental protection clause, or the other one is the safe sailing of the vessels. Now when we talk about the critical infrastructure, the non-clause doesn't say anything about the critical infrastructure or the seabed. This is one, and the other is still that, you know, what are the legal possibilities to onboard if necessary, if the vessel is not obeying your instructions. When you take the Eagle-S, then in Eagle-S case, the vessel obeyed the Finnish authorities' instructions and they moved to the Finnish territorial waters. So there are still question marks, and this is why one way to do that is to basically improvise and to take the UNCLOS and to, let's say, interpret that in a way that you can onboard if necessary. But the other option is that we are, in Estonia at least, changing the law, saying that we can also intervene or react in economical zone, looking at the UNCLOS. But of course, the maritime law is a bit more difficult, and we have to understand that there are different international players here. For instance, when we talk about big fleets like Denmark, Maersk, for instance, then we all understand that we don't want to end up in the situation that the IMO, the International Maritime Organization, will change the law in a way that in South China Sea, Chinese government can onboard to every ship of Maersk. So this is why it's not easy, but we have to acknowledge that there are risks where we might end up in the legal procedures when we onboard in Baltic Sea.
Excellent. We have about 7 more minutes, so perhaps you could address the second question posed by the gentleman, or?
What was the second question?
The Polish-Belarusian border, but Poland is with us.
Okay. Okay. On a just quickly on the first one, I think those arguments are not mutually exclusive. So on the one hand, certainly what just Hanno said, yes, you need to readjust some of the international law, approach to international law. But at the same time, of course, the willingness to act and capability to act must be in place right now. And I think what NATO is doing with its mission, what Joint Expeditionary Forces, again, thanks also for Netherlands being part of this, we're doing, I think this is an excellent example. We can do things already now, immediately. But at the same time, in the long-term perspective, this is one of the frameworks which are element of challenge as well in this regard. As for the Belarus, I think the response is very simple and short. Respectively, Belarus is protectorate satellite of Russia. So Russia and Belarus basically are the same country. So we are facing the threat from both countries equally, because what Belarus is doing, it's pretty much under the instructions of what Kremlin is saying. So here, when we build the Baltic Defence Line, there is no just Latvian Russian part of Baltic Defence Line, and that's it. It stops at the Belarusian border. The drone which crashed on Latvian territory crossed the Belarusian-Latvian border. So just once more underline importance of both borders being protected equally strong.
Excellent. There was would you,
Yeah, if I can add shortly, as I understand, it was also a question about practical measures. So since we have 700 kilometers border with Belarus, so fence, I mean, yeah, sometimes, remember a few years ago, building fences was funny, now it's not. So we have a physical barrier between Lithuania and Belarus. We are also preparing parks of counter-mobility measures, from dragon teeth to Spanish horses, and thinking about minefields. And this is quite shocking to talk about that, but we do have to think about that, because when we talk about borders, and I agree with Andris of Russia and Belarus, because it's basically the same, we really have not to limit, not to restrict ourselves, and show that we are ready to use anything and everything to ensure that our citizens do not live through hell that citizens of Bucha and Irpin in Ukraine had to live through.
Super. I promised the lady in the back a question, so please go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Anna Serova. I'm the chair of Dutch United Nations Student Association, and my question is going to be on the societal impact. How do you see honorable ministers engaging the youth specifically in defending NATO values, as well as strengthening the borders and engaging the youth in protecting our freedom? What can we do? Thank you.
Super, and there was a final question right there. Is it still there? No? Then we are going to ask the ministers to address the question, but also use it as a concluding statement, because we're nearing the end of our session. Mr. Brekelmans, can I give you the floor first?
I think it's a very important question. If you look at the NATO summit, which is coming up, there will be a whole also program towards the summit, which is particularly focused on engaging youth and to make sure that they are engaged in the discussion. Myself, I also go to different schools and speak to young people. My issue is that even with all those activities, you in the end only reach a limited number. And we need to also engage and connect with young people on a much bigger scale. But what we do see is that the usual media channels that we use are not that much viewed by young people. You know, they are looking at different programs, are using, listening to podcasts, social media, other types of things, which do not necessarily spend a lot of time on topics like this, on defense. And I think it's a challenge there. Of course, we have a dilemma with TikTok, for example. You know, many people from 16, 17 years old, their main channel of consumption is TikTok. And of course, we know all the issues with it, with China and all the dilemmas there. So also for us as a Ministry of Defence, we are very much looking at, you know, what are proper channels that we can use in order to also make young people more aware, to also have discussions with them. Of course, we are finding ways, but we haven't found the silver bullet yet. So any suggestions also from your side are very welcome. If I can, one last final remark, I won't reiterate everything that has been said, but I think what is the most important thing right now, we have different formats, NATO, JEF, EU, but also meetings like this. It is very important to coordinate and to also exchange what we are doing. Because, for example, the hybrid activities under sea, it was great for me to hear today what the three Baltic countries are doing in this, their latest thinking. But also, if, for example, what Hanno said about using the economic zone in the same way as your territory. Of course, there will be legal discussions about this. There will be different interpretations. And in this case, we don't have the luxury just to wait and to have endless discussions and to act once we... some lawyers have to finalize their thinking. You also need to try and also need to act in this sometimes legal gray zone. But then we need to support each other. You know, that if one of our countries is taking that step, we need to make sure that we are all standing shoulder to shoulder and support this step. And then see, you know, if it comes to court, you know, whether it will hold or not. We all don't know because it is new territory. And I think that's very important that we coordinate our actions, that we support each other, because we also need to navigate new legal territory or new, also to use measures that we haven't taken in the past. And finally, I think towards the NATO summit, there's also still a lot of coordination that we need to do, because there are big topics are at the table, also towards the summit. And I think today also was very important for this to make sure that at least we are in many ways, we are like-minded, to make sure that we align and to make sure that we further coordinate and cooperate.
Excellent, thank you.
Yes.
Minister Pevkur.
Yes, I would love to share my ideas about the youth, because this is an important topic for me. We have the conscription service, and one thing I would like to start with is the physical shape of our youth, young generation. Sorry to say, but from year to year, I see, and it's just the facts, that the physical condition of our young generation is going down. And we have the NATO test, so-called NATO test. And we see that less and less young people who are coming to the service are able to do that. So this all starts from the physical activity. The second part, the physical activity is of course important for the health condition and for the future health cost also. But the second part is what we have done in Estonia is that we introduced already many years back the national defense courses in our schools. Since last year, we said that it's obligatory for the schools to provide to each of the youngsters when they want to have the course. And this is very important, that it doesn't have to be like pure military course, but it is about understanding of the values of defending your country. And I believe that when you combine those things, first physical condition and secondly the understanding why we are defending our countries and why we have the defense spendings to live in the free world also in the future, then I really do hope that also the young generation will understand why the conscription service or why the expenditure for defense are so important. It's not us, you know, I'd like to be in the situation that we do not have the army or we do not have the defense spendings on the 5% level and we will invest that to the younger generation, to other fields. But the reality is that our neighbor in our neighborhood, Russia, is just hostile to us. And we do not want to lose our independence again. So this is why I believe that, and also we do not want to see the Third World War in Europe. So to understand that, to live in the free society and the free world, this is why we have to conclude our today's session, maybe, famous saying, si vis pacem para bellum. So if you want peace, prepare for the war.
Thank you. Minister Sprūds.
As Hanno said, he is a lawyer.
Sorry for that.
No, sorry. I've been a university professor for more than 20 years, so for me there is no need to convince me that involvement, engagement of young generation is absolutely crucial. You are the future of our defense and security, and of course you are already the present of our defense and security. So, as also saying goes, to put it a little bit in wider perspective, every generation has to experience its own revolution or its own formative experience. Many of us experienced back in the 1980s, 1990s, the collapse of empire, the change of environment. I think for the young generation now, what happens in Ukraine, what happens generally globally, this is a formative experience. And what I am really happy about and proud about also among young people in Latvia, that there is a huge increase of patriotism, involvement, engagement, enthusiasm. There is a lot of people who are joining conscription voluntarily. There exactly a lot of activities by young people joining different kind of defense and also patriotic organizations. There is an understanding also among young people how important it is to secure our defense security together. And here certainly the common dialogue between us all the time, permanent one, is absolutely crucial. Now also your advice is of course for our common comprehensive security, be it within our nation states, but be it of course also in Europe. So we certainly have to deal with those challenges together. And speaking of together, perhaps on a more humorous note, Ruben, you said you've been to Lithuania and you've been to Estonia. You've been in Latvia. So we want to have this dialogue productive. You are very much welcome to Latvia.
But we are here. So
yes, absolutely.
That's an invitation.
Yes, absolutely. So
Finally an invitation. Finally an
keep
invitation.
dialogues on all levels open. Yes.
This was because you didn't send an invitation.
No, don't be advocate now. You are a lawyer, I know.
Then I asked Minister Brekelmans, do you accept the invitation, sir?
Of course.
Yes.
Of course.
Okay, and then you had the first word, you'll get the last word. Minister Šakalienė.
Thank you, Tim. So nothing about young people without young people. That's my principle. And that's what we are going to use in both doing research about why some of our young people are not willing to join conscription, because some are not. Also what's wrong actually with health of young people? Because I agree with Hanno. 53% of our young conscripts are not healthy enough to perform their duties in the army. And this is unimaginable. So data and then decisions. And we are going to do these, we are going to do research with young people, and we are going to engage young people in the decisions related to them. And when you said what you could do, so hone your skills, every skill possible that could be useful if the time of war comes. My great-uncle was just a teenager when he was imprisoned by Soviets for disseminating leaflets that said that Lithuania is free. He was imprisoned, tortured, and sent to Siberia. Russians are not going to be sorry for anyone. Doesn't matter if it's a girl or a boy, if it's a teenager or adult or a senior person. So prepare as much as you can, because the best defense is deterrence. Let's be strong and let's generate strength. And that's also my message for the Hague Summit. We are the richest region. Europe is the richest region. We are the most stable region when we look globally. Why do we look hesitant? Why do we look as if we are willing to compromise when we are not? Let's finally not be afraid of our own strength. Let's generate power.
Thank you. I love it when a session such as this, which was already extremely insightful, is concluded with such a terrific question and such great concluding statements. So, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking our speakers, our ministers for today.
Yeah, so this concludes the morning session. The panel took a little bit more time, which was great because we had great discussions. So I suggest that we pick our finger food lunch now and reconvene 10 minutes later than in the schedule was addressed. So 5 minutes to 1 o'clock. It's quite strict. It's a big group. Finger food will be outside, and see you in a minute. After that, we handed over presents for our speakers.